I'm Kai Alberg, president of the PABA, and I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting. I'd like to ask you to please rise and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we can't hear it. Yeah.
Today, we have the last one of our electoral forum programs for this fall. And I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Andrew May, who will introduce the speakers and take it from here. Please go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you, President Kai. Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, Zoom participants, candidates, good morning and welcome to another beautiful day in Port Angeles. Before I continue, I just want to thank everyone who has helped put these debates together. If I mention them by name, it would certainly sound like an Oscar-winning acceptance speech. So suffice to say, it took an army to put this together, and I thank everyone. We end today's debate forum going back to the state District 24 race, and as we know in the past, many issues are facing the state, and many issues the state passes affect us directly. What is revenue sources? What are taxes, land use, infrastructure? And certainly during this pandemic, there's going to be unique stresses not only on what funds are requested, but what funds are needed. What are these candidates' issues? What legislation would they pass if they were elected? Let's find out. We'll listen to them, introduce themselves to us, answer the questions, and you, the voter, can decide. Now, let's introduce these speakers. First, we have the Republican challenger, Brian Pruiett. Brian, welcome, please. And we have the Democratic incumbent, Steve Tharinger. Steve, welcome. Good morning. Thank you. Now, we'll go over the rules again. They have not changed. Each candidate will get 5 minutes to introduce themselves, tell us anything they think is important. Each candidate will then have up to 2 minutes, if they would like, to rebut, refute, or add on. Then we go to questions, and questions always come from the membership first. The goal here is to make sure we are truly into an active discussion, so the best question will be answered 2, 3, 4 times by these candidates. And then we go to a 2-minute close. With that said, Steve won the sophisticated guess the number system, so when I get behind the camera to my moderator's table, we'll begin. Here so everybody can hear you, Steve.
So we're good to go.
Representative Steve Tharinger, you're on with 5 minutes.
Well, good morning, everybody, and I want to thank PABA and all the folks that Andrew was referring to in his opening remarks for putting this on. Obviously, it's been a very challenging campaign cycle. We haven't been able to do the normal number of forums and interaction with the electorate. So this helps to I think, connect with the voters and the voters to connect with us. So thank you for that effort. A lot of folks know my bio. I've lived on the peninsula for 45 years. I had a small woodworking business. I built my own house. I was involved with the Planning Commission and land use of the county. And I was a county commissioner in Clallam County for 3 terms for 12 years. And I've been honored and grateful to be able to be your state legislator for the last 10 years. And in that time, we've been able to work together, dealing with a lot of issues here on the peninsula, whether that be getting balanced funding for education, whether that's improving healthcare by increasing the reimbursement rate for OMC, providing funding for dental clinics, 2 of them here in Port Angeles, 1 of them in Jefferson County, and then dollars for hatcheries, dollars for the YMCA, dollars for the Boys and Girls Club, and dollars for the Performing Arts Center down on the waterfront here in Port Angeles. So working together with the rest of the delegation from the 24th, Senator Vanderweg and Representative Chapman, we've been able to sort of divvy up the different tasks for the multiple different issues that we face here on the peninsula and kind of divide and conquer, if you will, for the citizens of the 24th Legislative District. We have challenges right now. There's no question. The virus is writing a very difficult playbook for us. It's challenging our health. It's challenging our economy. It's challenging just our ability to get together and socially interact, which I don't know about you, but I'm certainly missing that. And so that's probably our biggest challenge moving forward, is how do we flatten that curve? Even though I think people here on the peninsula, both in Grays Harbor, Clown County, and Jefferson County, have done a real good job of following the protocols, social distancing, wearing masks, and everyone is wearing masks in this room, which I think is great. And that's how we have to beat the virus. I mean, quite frankly, disease and death is not a good thing for the economy or for our community. So we need to follow the right protocols and manage the virus, flatten that curve. And as we do that, our economy will come back and our community will come back. We've been, and that'll be my main focus when I get back, if with your vote, I get back to the legislature, to be able to handle the virus, improve our healthcare, and with that, address the issues that are facing our economy. And that's, jobs has always been a focus of mine here on the peninsula. We've been able to invest in job training working with Jefferson Healthcare and Olympic Medical Center and the Peninsula Community College. We stood up with funding from the state and funding from the different hospital foundations. We were able to stand up a training program for medical technicians, which was in huge demand for OMC and for Jefferson Health. And those students are assured jobs once they get out of the program at Peninsula College in those two hospitals. In fact, a lot of you remember Mr. Little John in Squim, who sorrowfully passed away last year. He actually was so impressed with that program, he provided one of the scholarships for the students there. The other thing we worked on is over in Jefferson County, where marine trades are an important trade, an important sector of the economy. We were able to make investments in a marine systems building that has one of the best teachers in Western Washington, maybe on the West Coast. And marine systems relate to diesel mechanics, hydraulics, and marine electronics. And those students also are guaranteed jobs in a highly competitive field with good economic future from that program. So those are the types of things I hope to continue to do if you send me back into the legislature this fall. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Tharinger. And now, Challenger Brian Pruiett, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank God Almighty for my presence here today. And I want to thank all of you who worked so hard to get this set up and worked diligently during this COVID pandemic, but more importantly, the problematic governor shutdowns. I want to thank you very much, my family, for supporting me in this candidacy and for the opportunity to be your new representative in legislature. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share who I am and what I'm going to do. Yes, I'm running for state representative, 24th Legislative District, position 2. I was raised here in the Pacific Northwest. My parents were educators and avid outdoorsmen. I've had 2 careers, both civil and military. I retired as lieutenant colonel and a battalion commander. I worked 3 years as an inspector general. I had 2 Afghanistan tours. I worked so hard rebuilding an economy from the ground up over there that I feel that I have some pretty good insight in what we need to do now to restore this one. We need economic recovery here. We need to improve infrastructure while carefully rebalancing the budget. During my time as an inspector general, I rooted out fraud, corruption, incompetence, and established innovative solutions. When I returned to Washington 15 years ago, I started working at my last duty station. In my civilian career, I was environmental manager and then team leader for the U.S. Department of Interior in industrial development mitigations, both of which are critical to our peninsula. In my last 5 years in civil service, I supervised 6 program directorates, including educational services, tuition assistance, equal opportunity, and drug demand reduction. We need economic recovery here. We need to rebuild our economy with safety and security. We need strong leadership, and that's what I bring to you. We need to be focused on restoring what was taken from us. I support a rollback of the new taxes legislature keeps increasing in session after session. I want to enable our family businesses and proprietorships to recover from the increased indebtedness that's been forced on us by the governor's shutdown. I propose a tax holiday for every day a small business was ordered to stay closed, and then they can get back on their feet. Our businesses are vital to our community, stability, and resiliency, both which have been greatly reduced by the closures and forced indebtedness. My purpose is to follow the science, operate safely, and ban the hypocritical regulations which don't follow science. We know we can keep people safe, and we've proven it. When the governor started talking in March about a 2-week closure, it's been just 2 weeks, correct? Look at your calendar. How's our curve been on the peninsula? Did we ever achieve a curve? We did, a flat one. We've shown that for 8 months now. There's no reason to keep perpetuating the angst and punishment for our small businesses. There are thousands of families, tens of thousands of employees and their families. COVID-19 can be deadly. Those with impaired health need to be careful from now forward. COVID is not going away. It's COVID-19. When I say that word, COVID-19, most people just brush past that. Disease was diagnosed almost a year ago now, in November of 2019. We need to start working while we can to help our businesses and their employees to get out of debt and work to restore profitability. We must help them thrive, not perpetually increase the burdens on them by taking more and more of what they've worked for. I've owned several small businesses. I know what it's like to work 70 and 80-hour weeks. The incumbent continues to pass on more debt loading every year to our Peninsula family and continues to insist on 4 more business taxes on this ballot. I urge you to look at your voter's guide. I'm against having all those new taxes. I'm against the burden it places on our families, and I'm against the resiliency that's being taken from us. The incumbent wants to have a carbon tax that would be ruinous on all aspects of our trades, truckers, and families here, driving prices higher on every commodity that is delivered to our peninsula. Our businesses are our greatest asset to our community, not a cash cow. Yet my opponent still sees dollar signs even with closed businesses. He pushes for state income tax. I stand for increased economic opportunity and equality for all. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And now, Steve, if you'd like, take up to 2 minutes to add on, rebut, or give us more of your philosophy.
I think that experience matters when you're in the legislature. One doesn't just get elected and then start getting to a position such as mine as chair of the capital budget, or on the appropriations committee, or on the healthcare committee, 3 committees that are very important to life here on the peninsula. It takes time to build those relationships and build those networks. And I've been able to do that to position myself to be effective for us here on the peninsula. I mentioned the healthcare, being able to link the policy from the healthcare committee to the investments from the capital budget has been a big advantage for us here on the peninsula. I mentioned the dental clinics that we were able to stand up at the North Olympic Health Organization and at Jefferson Healthcare and at the Volunteers of Medicine Clinic. Those have huge savings for us here on the peninsula, because people that were not getting dental care are now getting dental care in a dental chair, as opposed to ending up in the emergency room where it's more expensive and not as good a care. And so by having these dental clinics, more people are accessing dental care. They're getting ahead of their healthcare issues, which could, not addressing dental care can lead to other issues around diabetes or heart conditions. So that kind of linking of capital investment and policy is what I've been able to do, and have the relationships with the committee chairmen and with the policymakers in Olympia. And so I think experience matters and takes time to build those relationships, which I've done over the last 10 years.
Thank you very much. And now, Brian, would you care to take a couple minutes to continue on?
Yes, please. My opponent has gone on record favoring an income tax. We need infrastructure, but you can't take everything away from everybody. And we've seen the brunt of that here in our peninsula. They closed down thousands of small businesses in March, and many have gone into debt, many more have gone broke. You've seen more places for sale now. That's not helping our community. You can keep taking money and keep doing projects, but when you take $7 million and give it to a private corporation that can charge Medicaid 10 times the rate, how are we going to get Medicaid to cover for everybody else? That means that 9 other people, for every one you want to send to that private corporation, 9 other people don't get Medicaid reimbursement. And our Olympic Peninsula needs that help. We need to continue supporting our medical system here. Our hospital right here in town reported last year over $5 million in unreimbursed costs. Our Medicaid is important to us. The state supports it, I support it. I want to see continued healthcare coverage, but we frankly need an increase in capability for that in our area. I want to talk about being chairman. If you're chairman, you have greater responsibility, and I don't see that being exerted in what we've had to have. The state was required in 2013 to establish pandemic supplies, testing materials, and PPE. It did not. And so what happened in March was a travesty for all of us. You had thousands and thousands of medical workers laid off. You had medical procedures stopped simply because we didn't have pandemic level supplies. I think that's wrong. I think it's a mistake in leadership. I think we need a change. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. And now we get to the fun part, questions. I do believe, Brian, you'll be leading, answering the first question, and it comes from a member, and it actually is dealing with something you've been talking about. Do you feel, both of you, that Jay Inslee has overstepped his authority as governor in mandating business closures, mask wearing, and to halt the spread of the coronavirus? If he has overstepped his authority, what, if anything, would you specifically have done to deal with the pandemic? And Brian, you are first.
A lot of us feel we're operating in the unknown. This virus was discovered in November 2019. It devastated China. In January, we're getting warnings. We got travel alerts. In February, the disease hit here. And in March, our governor delayed 2 weeks, or almost 3 weeks after the president ordered a shutdown. To me, that's not paying attention. Instead, he was focused on the new taxes he wanted to implement with his new revenue forecast, his new revenue takings from us, and a spending program. And our legislature went right along with it. We're dominated by the Democrats. We respect that they are influential far beyond anybody else. And that's what they did. They spent all the new money, and now we're in a deficit situation because in May, we begged, our business here in Port Angeles were begging for intervention from our legislature to go to the governor. And what happened? Many of you were on that May Zoom conference call with economic development. What happened?
And the questioner, though, would like to know, so you disagree. What would you have done right away to deal with this pandemic? If you were the governor, what would you have done?
I would have avoided shutting down our small businesses. I would have made sure we had pandemic supplies in place. I would have prevented the adverse impact our peninsula here. There is a modicum of information available. There's daily publications being put out by medical professionals in what they call peer-reviewed research. And we know that there are actions we can take. We know that there are remedies. We know that it is very important that we advise people not just how many deaths we have in the nation and how many illnesses, but we have to advise them on how to avoid. Hand washing and masking are important, but they don't cure the economic shutdown, and it was wrong to close all our small businesses. I would not have done that. And as soon as we had more information, I would have said, we have to reopen our small businesses, not leave them closed for so long. There are certain activities we know can spread the virus more rapidly than others. We knew that. It's nothing new. It's nothing unique to COVID, but those actions were not taken. Instead, we were crying for more medical relief, respirators, hospital ships, and everything else. That was wrong. We should have kept our businesses open, but moreover, we should have convened a special session of the legislature, at least in May, And look how many months have gone by now. We have a severe need for rebalancing the budget. And I hate seeing the rejoicing in the media now. It says our revenues now show we're only going to be $2 billion in the hole. We still need to go back. And I agree with Lauren Culp when he said, you know, a 10% across the board cut, that's a lazy, ignorant way to talk about rebalancing the budget. We need to do it smart, and that needs to be done with a reconvene of the legislature, which the incumbent has refused to call for. I think that's wrong. I would do different. I would be pounding the table every day, demanding that we rebalance and take care of our families on this peninsula, not the I-5 corridor interests, which our chairman of the Capital Budget Committee represents far better than he represents us, you and I.
So let's find out then. Steve. You were governor. How would you have handled the pandemic?
Yeah, I don't think he overstepped his authority. Whether he got it right, what he did is I think is the question. I think it's very clear, and as I've said before, one of the things I learned when I first became a commissioner back in 2000, in one of my first couple days as a county commissioner, the public health officer has a lot of power during these health crises, and they and I think rightfully so, depoliticize the issue and apply science and good public health policy to trying to manage, you know, public health crises. And so I think the power is there for the governor to do that. Whether he got it right in the, you know, charting the way through these troubled, uncharted waters, I think is the question. And contrary to what my opponent said, I did sign a letter that would have requesting the governor bring us back into special session before the end of the fiscal year, because I thought we would then be able to make changes to the budget and the fiscal year ends at the end of June. And so we sent the letter, I think, at the end of May or the first part of June. That made some sense. As it turns out, the governor both saved about $450 million out of when he vetoed a number of line items within the supplemental budget. And then when we didn't go back into special session, he furloughed a number of state employees. He put a moratorium on any new hires and did a couple of other things, contracts and whatever, that saved another, you know, tens of millions of dollars. So when we didn't go back before the end of the fiscal year, it seemed like it didn't make as much sense. The argument then was that to wait and see what would happen with the economy and wait and see, you know, the federal government was actually responding in a responsible way by passing the CARES Act. And that, I think, has led to us having a good revenue forecast, this last revenue forecast, the September revenue forecast. And so that's filled up half the hole that we had in our budget at this time. So a little bit of the weeds here in budgeting. So we write a 4-year budget with a 2-year biennial actual budget and then a 2-year outlook. We're in the second year of the biennium, and that challenge before the revenue forecast was about $4 billion. It's now been reduced to 2. We have, contrary to what my opponent says, we have a rainy day fund, a Budget Stabilization Act fund that had $4 billion. We used, before we left town, $200 million of that for the virus. The discussion, it was pretty interesting. In like 24 hours, it started out at 50 million, and just almost hourly, we were realizing the impact of the virus. So before we left town, we had put 200 million into a virus response fund, but that left $3 billion remaining in that fund. So that would cover the costs in the budget for the end of this biennium, or the fiscal year that started July 1st. Plus there was a balance at the budget at the end because of what the governor did, and we left a balance when we left town. So there was another $1 billion there. So that challenge for this second year of the biennium has been met because of better economic activity, using the budget stabilization account, and the balances that we accomplished. So the big challenge for us when we go back in Olympia is writing the next biennial budget, and that challenge is about $4 billion. And if we use our reserves now, we're going to have to look at some cuts, and hopefully some increased revenue activity. And there may be a need for taxes as you.
And I'm going to interrupt here as we drift a little bit over the question. And I'm sure, Brian, you're going to respond a little bit to some of the answers about the governor, about what the state is doing, the budget.
Thank you very much. You know, I think it's important, as the incumbent pointed out, President Trump and the Republican senator are the ones that got that CARES Act funding for us. And what did our state do with it? They said they had a furlough, but I have a buddy that works for the state. You know what he got paid for his day off from the CARES funding? $714 for not working on a Friday. That's not really a furlough. The state didn't really do a good job, and I certainly challenge the incumbent on his claim, the numbers that he's citing, because he doesn't really know. Why doesn't he know? We have things like the Employment Security Division that the chair of the Capital Budget Committee approved $47 million for a computer system. When you speak to the people who were there in the ESD during that implementation, they will tell you that system wasn't working. The employees hated it. It wasn't accurate. And so what happened to us? What happened to everybody that got unemployed? They lost their jobs, got laid off, got furloughed. Nigerian scammers came in. Do you remember the number that they took? There was a claim of $650 million. And I challenge anybody to show me where the accountability is for what was actually recovered, because there has not been an audit. I support Chris Laban. We need a new auditor in there to clean up our government, get accountability for what we're paying for. And there's thousands of people who are still telling me this month, they still are not getting their unemployment paid. How are they going to make it through this pandemic? How are we going to make it through the continuing budget crisis that we're facing? And to brag that we only are $2 billion underwater, that's pretty fallacious thinking in my accounting. And I've dealt with corruption, fraud, and malfeasance and ignorance before, and we need to get it cleaned out of government now.
And Steve, I do know in conversations with people, there was concern about not only the delay on money for some folks, but the particular loss of money through, it seems like, fraudulent claims. Do you know why this happened? Do you know what's being done about it?
Yeah. And Andrew, I want to just go back to, the question about the governor. I did not agree with his opening big box stores and not opening storefronts. I think that was a mistake. We sent letters to the governor and worked with his staff and corrected that. We also were very concerned the fact that he was allowing commercial construction and not residential construction. We worked on that and got him to move so that there was more residential construction would open up. And then Oregon did not close down its car dealerships. We did. And so we worked with the governor's office to get that removed. So I think when he first came out of the block with some of his policies, they were too restrictive, but working with the governor's office, and at that point during the virus, we were meeting with them weekly. We were able to get that squared away. Sorry, Andrew, what was your follow-up question on the revenues? Oh, the ESD. Yeah, the ESD. So Washington was the first state, right, that had to deal with the virus. And so and then the money came in from the CARES Act, and the ESD tried to get that money out the door as fast, as quickly as possible. And in that effort, they were susceptible to this Nigerian fraud ring. And they took, the figure is around $600 million by intercepting those checks, portraying themselves as fraudulent recipients of those dollars and taking that money out. The state was able to recover, at this point, I think it's around 370 million of that, but it's still a big challenge. Software at the state level is a huge problem. We actually, contrary to what my opponent says, we don't fund software in the capital budget. The rule of thumb is you need to fund something that's going to stay around for about 30 years or so. So we use bricks and mortar and steel and construction. We don't fund software. We don't fund computers. We don't fund internet, equipment because of its short lifespan. So, but I will say that the state's software is, it's old. It needs to be replaced, and it's a huge cost. If you think about the volume, this is a good example. I mean, the ESD was used to handling about 7,000 claims a month. All of a sudden, they were handling about 100,000 claims a week, and they just weren't ready for it. But it was, an sort of untracked wave of demand. So that's not to say they couldn't done better. My office has worked, my legislative assistant, Leanne Horn, has done a really good job working with a number of constituents. That's probably how we've spent most of our office time since the virus started, helping people work their way through the ESD compensation system. And she's been very successful. There's still folks out here in the district and constituents that are struggling, but there's no question it's been a huge problem. But I think part of it is just the wave to go from 7,000 to 150,000 is a huge jump, and they were overwhelmed. And so hopefully people will have learned from this experience and it will get better.
And let's hear from Brian. In your opening, you seem to have a lot of expertise in this field. What you think you could have done to avoid this had you been a legislator at the time?
As a legislator, I certainly would have brought all the pressure I could bear to replace the management. I mean, wouldn't you and I love to have the opportunity to lose $650 million with no accountability whatsoever, except to go weekly and say, we've got the program fixed. And in fact, in a prior debate, Mr. Tharinger, the incumbent, stated, well, we've mostly got that taken care of. Everybody's paid and we've got things taken care of in Employment Security Division. To me, that's either just ignorance or actually willful participation. You know, I just don't agree with that attitude. Things are not fixed. The entire leadership team needs to be changed, and that has to happen. The only way you can get pressure is to reconvene legislature, and that has not happened. I admire his claim that he tried to get legislature reconvened, but he really didn't put that much effort into it. And he put out one document. I saw the letter that he and the two cronies he's got, Mike and Kevin, put out. It was not a demand for the governor to take action.
And here comes an interesting follow-up from a past president of the PABA, Matthew Rainwater. And Brian, I'll have you follow up and then Steve answer. Should the head of a department, budget chair, be responsible for loss of money to scammers? Should they be held accountable?
One thing I keep hearing over and over again is the explanation of how many millions of dollars are spent on this and that. But I've heard very little feedback from people on claiming what success was, what the efficacy was of that money that's getting spent. And clear, in this case, we have an egregious offense, and I have yet to hear anybody from our legislative body in the Democratic caucus demand that the leadership change in the Employment Security Division. As I stated, I have thousands of families here that are saying they still are not getting taken care of, they're not getting what they are entitled to. The employers paid into that. That is our money that's been going to the fund. And the employees aren't getting it. That's the bottom line here. The bottom line, we've still got ongoing corruption, ongoing malfeasance, and it hasn't been fixed.
Steve, as budget chair, what, if any, culpability role do you have in this?
Earlier, the capital budget has no relationship to the software problem that was at ESD. We don't fund that. That's an operating budget issue, and it goes through the executive branch. I think corruption's a little hyperbole. The corruption certainly came from the Nigerian group, but I don't think there was anyone in the ESD department that was corrupt. That's kind of a simple little bumper sticker, slogan that doesn't really stick with reality. So, but I think certainly government should be held accountable. There's no question about that. And the auditor audits now. I mean, it's required. They do it. They audit every department and they audit the funding. And I'm sure as they work through the process of the ESD, they will find things to improve that process. As I said earlier, there are folks that we're still working with or that need some support to work with the ESD, but from where we were in May to where we are now, we have been able to help a majority of the folks that have been impacted.
All right, now we're going to move on to another question. This comes from a former past president as well, John Brewer. R90 is the only public referendum on the ballot. Do you favor or oppose sex education referendum R90, which in the words of the measure require public schools, and I quote, to provide comprehensive sexual health education for all students and require students to be excused if requested by their parents, unquote. Steve, do you favor the referendum 90?
Yes, I voted for the bill on the floor. Most of the schools in the state provide sex education in some form or another at this point. The way the bill is written, parents can opt out, and it's a local decision by the school board of what kind of policies they want to engage in. The data is very clear. Solid sex education reduces teen pregnancy, reduces sexually transmitted disease, and diminishes sexual abuse. And I think those are three things all of us can agree on that need to be addressed. And so if you talk to any prosecutor that deals with sexual violence or domestic violence or predatory activity, they will say that giving students and kids better understanding about what's appropriate and what's not as far as contact and touching is very important. I mean, just an anecdote, probably, more than half of the sexual abuse is within the family. It's either an uncle or a parent or someone that's known within the family. So you need that student, that child needs to have someone they can trust and someone they can go to help them explain and get a handle on these issues. And then, as all of us know, 70% of what goes on the internet is pornography. So this is not something that you could just hide under and try to avoid. You need to address it. The protocols that are, and again, parents have a chance to opt out. School districts have a lot of independence around this, and most of the schools in the state are already doing it.
Brian, do you oppose, favor R90, and if so, why?
This coffee cup is a memento of my 10 years working with abused foster children. I feel very strongly that we have sexual education that works. It has to be used by the state schools. I believe R90 should be repealed. It's far too graphic, and it interweaves graphic sexual content from kindergarten all the way through high school. I do not support that law. I want it repealed. We have sexual education content available and have had for many, many years. I'm an old guy, but I remember it when in 5th grade. That was in the 1960s. We've had the education needed for young men, young women, boys and girls, but weaving it from kindergarten and then having the state school superintendent of public instruction say, I'm not going to approve yours unless it teaches our kids at age 14 what lesbianism, bisexualism, transgenders, and how to do it. Basically, they're trying to incorporate a how to do it manual. And we have to come up with the funding for this curriculum as well during a time of budget crisis. I don't agree with that. I agree that we have had adequate sexual education already, and I ask you all to repeal this graphic new law that the incumbent voted for twice on the floor. Go and look at the content yourself. It's there on the internet. See what they want to teach our 2nd and 3rd graders.
Anything to add, Steve?
Well, if you're going to the internet for information on this, I would advise you to not respect it because there's a lot of the graphic nature. I will just tell you the opposition to this bill on the floor and what they talked about was some of the most disgusting, embarrassing time I've spent in the legislature. In fact, Representative Chapman stood up and said that what you are saying offends my Christian values. So there's a lot of misinformation about this bill, and the internet is not the place to get that information. This argument about the graphic nature is just not true. And you need to go to a reputable source to approve 90 safe and healthy youth and go to the website, which really talks about the bill and talks about the reality of what this is. And and it is so much in our political dialogue today, it's distorted by on the internet. And if you get the facts and talk to school districts and talk to prosecutors who deal with these issues, they all support the referendum.
Brian, do you have some sources you would like to send people
Yeah,
to?
the claim that they all support it is certainly a fallacious one. I believe and I advocate that local school boards and parents need to be the ones responsible for deciding what is age appropriate for their children, not Chris Reckdahl. I advocate we need to vote Chris and get Maya Espinoza in to restore the values we need to have for good family values and grandparents raising kids at home and all the other things that we have to deal with now during this economic shutdown.
Now we're going to move to a question, and Brian, you'll start this one from one of our county commissioners here. Out in the peninsula, we certainly count on trust lands to fund all sorts of junior tax districts. And the budget many times is unknowable. So what reforms, if any, should the legislation consider as trustee for state trust lands?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear the full question, the last part you said.
And I apologize. So the question is, what reforms, if any, should the legislation consider as trustees for trust lands? So do you think there's any way to modify how the state manages trust lands?
The question is really, I think you asked about what we need to have in the county and what the state roles are.
You can answer both.
Okay, first off, we need to protect those state lands. And one of the key issues for that we had last year was we had record high taxes and record high revenues. And we're all familiar with the danger of fire, wildfire, loss of our resources, loss of wildlife, and threat to structures on adjacent private lands. And so we look at what the Department of Natural Resources requested. They requested increased firefighting capability, and it was placed at the bottom priority for the biennial legislation last year for funding. I disagree with that. We need to really look at increasing what is available because there's so many DNR lands within our district, and we need to stop trying to take more lands out of production. I disagree with what's going on with the marble murrelet issue that the incumbent has failed to fight against for us. That impacts us intensely. If that goes through, we're going to lose income that we need to have for schools. In a time when school budgets are in crisis, this district alone reports that they have a $2.8 million shortfall. It was just in the paper this week. Fortunately, they're able to cover it by not hiring people, but we need to keep resourcing both our public schools, and I endorse supporting private schools as well. Elementary schools, schools for our kids. And I disagree with the incumbent support for the Wild Olympics proposal, which is taking so much acreage out of multiple use. That could be for recreation, which provides income for us all. It can be for forestry purposes. And I want to say thank you to this county for waking up and trying to hire a forester to monitor what our forest resources are doing. They're so critical, not just to this county, but the entire peninsula.
Very good. Steve, the same question. What is the role of the state and trustee lands? What reforms would you offer if there is some to be made?
We've worked on a legislation. I think Representative Chapman was the lead, and certainly Senator Van Wyck and I supported it, to get an independent audit of the DNR lands. I don't think the DNR is totally aware of the type of species, the harvestable acreage that they actually manage. And we feel that an independent audit of their landscape and therefore the portfolio of the beneficiaries, if you will, would be helpful. And then I think the important thing is to with that, getting that inventory, getting a sustainable yield calculation that is predictable and dependable, that's out 20 years. So if you're investing in a logging truck or a mill, or as a lot of folks know, I've been a proponent of proposing and promoting mass timber, cross-laminated timber. But if you're going to make those investments, you need to know that there's going to be a sustainable yield for the 20 years or 30 years that you're borrowing that money for. And getting that inventory, an independent audit that shows you what those, what's on the landscape, and then projecting that into a dependable yield out 20 to 30 years is, I think, really where the department needs to go. They've made some changes. I mean, when I was a commissioner, a lot of folks know you meet with DNR on a quarterly basis, and it's always been a huge issue. We talked with them. One of the things that the private sector did that DNR didn't do is DNR would always would put their sales up in November after the building cycle, right? I mean, the building cycle really happens in the summer. So they started varying when they would put those sales up, as the private sector did. The other thing that the private sector did that the DNR wasn't doing that they're now doing is you have several different sales that are ready to go depending on what the market is. If it's an alder market, you have an alder sale. If it's a fir market, if it's a hemlock. So having a more versatile portfolio so that you can be more nimble to address the market. They're getting better at that. They're not as good as the private sector, but I think those are some of the things I would force them to do, and we're trying to do that. We met quite a bit of resistance on the audit for the independent audit, but I think we'll take another run at it this session.
And before I go to Brian for a response, let me kind of follow up on that. Counties like us that are suffering because of the arrearage problem, a shortage of money that was due, should the state owe counties like us some kind of back payment because it's directly associated with the arrearage problem?
Yeah, and the arrearage issue is an accounting issue, and I think there's more value, as I said earlier, in getting that sustained yield calculation moving forward so that you can make those investments, you have a dependable return. To try and solve the arrearage and go back and say, okay, now we're going to go from 40 million board feet to 120, but then we're going to go back to 20, in 2 years out, doesn't seem to make sense. We have working with actually the school districts and the Association of School WASDA, we've been able to, and Cindy Kelly was important with this, and Jim Stauffer in SQUIM, we were able to, working with Superintendent Rakedahl, to get reimbursement. We've been jeopardized by the timber harvest value. It was subtracted from our allocation that we were getting for our schools. And Superintendent Rakedahl did not think that was a fair thing, so he changed the rule. So we now get to keep the dollars that come from our timber harvest and our regular, it's not subtracted from the regular allotment per student that we get. That's going to be a battle, quite frankly. We worked hard to sustain that over these last two budgets. I'll be just honest, the appropriation staff and the appropriations chair doesn't think that's equitable, thinks that I try to compare our forest to high rises and hotels and things like in the I-5 corridor, and that's their value, where our value is the forest. They say it's unfair because it gives an extra bump to the school districts and in timber communities. So we're going to continue to try to find that balance between getting our revenue off the forest to our schools and not having that subtracted from our regular allotment for school support. And
Brian, please feel free to respond to anything, but I'd also like to know if you think there's some obligation by the state to counties like us in arrearage.
Yeah, I'm not going to try and obfuscate the answer like you just heard. What I'm going to say is this. I think it's wrong, and that's why the fire districts are suing right now, because the Marble Murrelet shut down and the threatened takeover of so many lands and removing them from multiple use. We are a multiple use peninsula. We need to continue managing timber as a renewable resource. In that aspect, we need to continue to look at long-term productivity. We need to look at what the private corporations have been able to do successfully and apply many of those principles to what we have going on DNR lands. Right now, there's been more timber harvested in Jefferson County than Clallam County in terms of current revenues. And we need to look at the fact that right now, the timber prices are going up, lumber prices going up. There's a big push right now to get everything hauled to the mill that they can before winter sets in. We have to face the fact of what climate change is doing, making it wetter winters here. That increases damage when you try to go in and log. We need to pay attention and keep those roads open, passable, and repaired for DNR lands to continue doing ongoing sustainable harvests. Those are all critical issues we need to look at. And as far as what goes on in financing, again, we need to stop hurting Clallam County. Clallam County has the most population density. It's got people that are dependent upon timber resources, and we need to sustain them.
Anything to add before we move on, Steve?
Pretty well.
All right, here comes a question. And as we know, we've always heard jobs, jobs, jobs. We do know that revenue is going to be something everyone's asking for. The question is, lawmakers approved nearly $9 billion of tax breaks for Boeing. With Boeing's decision to consolidate production of its 787 jetliner in South Carolina and shut down its original line for the plane in Everett, do you agree with Governor Inslee that we should take a hard look at the company's favorable tax treatment? So, do these tax breaks for Boeing need to be reevaluated? Representative Tharinger.
We made a mistake when what we did is we just extended the Boeing tax cut that was already on the books for another 25 years. So that's what actually happened. That was the mechanics. But what we didn't do and what we tried to do and were unable to accomplish in that special session was to link that tax incentive to number of jobs. So the link was to the 777 MAX, which they've followed through on, and they're building that in Everett. And sadly, it looks like one of the the major planes that will be continued to be built there, while the 787 goes to the Carolinas. But we did not have a metric, have a requirement for number of jobs.
Would you support that, or would you write legislation to modify that?
Well, we've tried, and I've supported that in the past, and we weren't able to get it through the Senate, nor was the governor willing to sign it. So it's interesting for him to say, we need to relook at this. So that, I think, is one of the important metrics. And as it turns out, Missouri and Kansas and places where some of these jobs have gone, they have that metric. They have that linkage between the tax incentive and the number of jobs. Boeing did increase jobs for around the 777 MAX. They made capital investments in their facilities in Everett, but I think we have overall net have lost jobs even with that tax incentive.
Very good. Brian, same question. Do these tax breaks for Boeing need to be reevaluated?
Let's listen carefully and recap what we just heard. The Senate wouldn't push it through and the government wouldn't support it. But in fact, there was a bipartisan issue that was pushed through Senate and went for governor's signature. And the governor vetoed that. And what it was an act to get us out of trouble globally because we were giving Boeing unfair advantages. So we worked to pass a law through legislature that made it equitable for all plane manufacturers stationed in our state. That's what the governor vetoed. And so instead, what we had during last session was another legislative tax against Boeing. If you recall, they already outsourced part of the Boeing to another state several years ago. Now we're facing another one because the legislative laws keep targeting aerospace industries and chasing jobs out of state. Some of those jobs are the best paying jobs you can find anywhere. Most of us have friends who worked for Boeing, retired from Boeing, and they'll tell you it's a good working environment. It's a legacy for our state. Then for the governor to claim that, well, they're going to have to come back here. I'm sorry, but that's not reality. You have to face what you're doing, and we have consequences for what legislature has done to our aerospace industry, to aviation. And you couple that with what's going on with the governor's shutdown on travel, the valid virus concerns globally, and we are not going to see us coming out of this very soon. Economists that I respect say we really can't see a full recovery projected until the year 2023. That's a long ways away. And I agree, we are facing a dire outlook, and I think we have to stop chasing jobs out of our state if we want to sustain our economy and get the revenues we need to support everything we need to have. revenues for infrastructure, revenues for Medicaid, all those needs that we've identified for our state and our peninsula.
Steve, should we stop chasing jobs out of state?
Well, not surprisingly, my opponent's a little confused here. So the original tax incentive that was passed, the extension of the existing tax incentive was, 6 years ago. Or, I may not have that date right, but that was to hold on to to have the 777 MAX built in Everett. The tax policy around Boeing that we did this session was actually brought to us by Boeing because they were facing repercussions from the EU and the World Trade Organization. So they needed that tax incentive repealed in order to strengthen their case with the World Trade Organization. And that's the one we passed this year. So I think that's the clarity. I mean, Washington has been ranked over the last few years, either either number one or in the top 3 by Forbes and a number of business magazines and policy people as the best place in the country to do business. We have a vibrant economy and a very diverse economy. We're not as dependent on extractive industries like fishing and forestry. We're not totally dependent on aerospace. We're not totally dependent on software and tech. We have a very robust research facilities in world health and world science. And so we're doing well. We can always do better. And quite frankly, that's why looking at our tax structure, which every business has to, with the B&O tax, every business has to come to the legislature for an exemption for investments, whether they're investing in centrifuges or milling machines. And that's crazy. They should be able to make those business decisions themselves. But because of our B&O tax being a tax on gross receipts, they need an exemption from us to not have that tax. So that's if you're a startup business, and I went through this as a manufacturer when I started my wood manufacturing business, I would get taxed even if I was making investments in advertising, or if I was making investments in new employees, or I was making investments in new equipment or investments in R&D. I would be taxed on that instead of my net. After I'd made these investments, grow my business, taking those costs out, then tax me. But we don't do that in this state. So the tax structure itself is limits and stifles entrepreneurship in my mind, yet we're still a leader as a state. I think it's partly because we have, a very solid workforce, we have a good education system, and it's a great place to live, and the quality of the workforce and the quality of the product that workforce creates is pretty obvious.
Brian, are you confused on this issue?
I think we need to contrast what we read with what we hear and decide, who does this person really work for? I looked on the website, the governor website, say the internet can't be trusted. Well, if that's true, then does that refer to the governor and our state website as well? Because what it shows is this. It shows that the incumbent has voted repeatedly and consistently for every B&O tax, and to hear him discredit that, I have to say, I have to go with what the written record is rather than what we're hearing today. If you keep going to those industries, and you just stated that those industries have to come to legislature for exemption, and you have to ask yourself, why do they need to ask exemptions? Aren't we supposed to operate in a free market? Shouldn't we be able to conduct our businesses within meaningful, safe regulatory standards and practices to conduct business? The state issued a license to us to do so. Why aren't we being allowed to do that? Why do we have to go and ask for exemptions? There's one answer. Because the incumbent is the key person, chair of the budget committee, and key to pushing through more and more taxes. Get your state voters guide, look at pages 14 and 18. You'll see proof right there. So for him to say he's against B&O taxes, I'm sorry, voting record certainly shows the opposite.
So now we're going to move on to the last question before we close. But before we close, I do want to take this opportunity to really thank any candidates who have come before us to go out there for public service, to put yourself in front of the Grand Inquisition. I think the public just is so fortunate to have individuals really want to dedicate themselves to public service. With that said, I'm going to give you a magical power. And Brian, you're going to start this question. You're going to have the magical power to put thought into and rise the attention of the public. What state issues do you feel don't get enough attention from either the media or the state legislation, and why?
The bottom line for me is integrity, competency, and accountability. The government should have two sole purposes: to establish a judicial system that provides for safety and equity for all of us, and funding of public infrastructure. I feel very strongly about those. If we don't have a good judicial system with the laws that keep safe streets, keep needles and feces from proliferating everywhere in public places, allowing dumping on public lands, kicking criminals back on the street to continue their depredations, harming themselves and harming others, that's a foundational principle we need to get back to. And weakening the laws by decriminalizing behavior and kicking those harmful people back on the streets after an overnight stay is not the good solution. We need to look at what we're doing for infrastructure and get better accountability. It's no secret to anybody that our projects are taking twice as long now to build the same interchange, the same overpass, the same road, the same bridge, taking twice as long because of the excess unneeded regulations. I worked in the federal government for 20 years as an environmental manager. I worked with FEISs and draft environmental impact statements. I've done hundreds of environmental analysis. And I will tell you, from my competency and my experience, there is overburdensome regulation. We need to have the basic sideboards, that's clear. But there's too much and it's delaying everything we're trying to do to help the public, to help our peninsula. And the budget that we're putting towards those projects just keeps increasing and increasing. One paper said the two new interchanges, the roundabouts along Highway 104 now, are estimated at $14 million. I don't know if that's true. I can tell you what the state website shows, $8.8 million for those two roundabouts. I think we can have much better financial results by spreading project monies wider and getting it done in a timely manner. Those are the two key important things for us besides the economic crisis we're in now, which needs to be resolved, needs to be rebudgeted, and we need to give relief to people, not take more of their money.
Representative Tharinger, the same question. You have this power to put into the public's mind, this burning interest. What does not get enough attention in both the media or the legislation?
Good question, Andrew. And I would say, I guess equity is an issue that needs to be, it's being talked about now more than it has in the past, but I think the discussion needs to be increased and better focused. I think equity around healthcare, equity around education, equity around access to broadband, equity certainly around opportunity for folks, equity around housing. Mother Nature, as people know, does not like imbalance. I mean, we're seeing big storms, right, because of climate change, and Mother Nature's trying to readjust the temperature of the planet. We're seeing water that's being, absorbed because of higher temperatures. She's got to dump that out. She's being, impacted by release of all the carbon that's anthropomorphic. And so she's trying to find that balance. And I think the same thing applies to our social activities and our human nature. And the economy is really imbalanced. There's a huge disequilibrium when the tax cuts that came out of Washington helped the upper 1% and really impacted poorly the lower 40%. And that kind of imbalance cannot stand. There needs to be an adjustment. Hopefully we can do that adjustment politically, but I would say a lot of the disruption you're seeing that's outside the political sphere is related to trying to find that equilibrium, trying to get back to a more balanced point. And that's, I think, the big challenge for us in our work as elected officials in the legislative body, is to work to provide more balance, more equity across the board, whether that's in racial relationships, whether that's in housing, whether that's in economics, because our system will not stand if we don't find a better balance.
Well, as we move to the close, I want to thank both of you gentlemen for not only coming here early, but having such a thoughtful discussion. With that said, Brian, 2 minutes to.
Thank you. Well, you will never hear me invoking pagan spiritualism into how our ecosystem works. You will never hear me claim that we need to have equilibrium when we have to respect what solar physicists are saying about the influence of the sun on our planet. Study it a little bit, but don't subject us to your religious beliefs here on paganism. I want to say that I believe in God we trust, the motto of our United States. I support that concept. We have to thank the people that put all this on. I thank you so much for being here today. Once again, I have worked so many decades to uphold what I've had to do for standards for employment. That is to be honest, have integrity, have accountability, and have a basis for making decisions. I have to make sure that I continue to carry that forward, and I will, to maintain fiscal accountability to get the best results for what we're spending. You can count on me to stop trying to influence what's going on in your home with your children and their education as far as sex. We have to respect what we're going to do, and we need to look at how we're going to help people do homeschooling. We need to look at how we're going to help people doing small pod schooling, given that this pandemic, this disease is not going away. Doctors tell us it's so similar to what goes on with influenza that we have to account for how we're going to take care of people, keep them healthy. We have to uphold our medical systems. We have to make sure that key resources like a medical center are sourced. And I am very grateful to them personally because my family's been taking care of them by several crises in our family. They're fantastic people here. And I appreciate all the doctors and medical support we have. We need to look at what we're doing for home health care for seniors. That's critical to taking care of our community. I want to thank you so much for letting me be here. And thank you for your votes. Thank you for support. Don't forget to vote for Pruiett in this election for a positive change in what's going on and recovery of our finances, our homes, our families, and our peninsula. Thank you so much.
All right, very good. And Steve? Very good. Steve, 2 minutes for your closing.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for moderating. Thanks to the PABA for providing this forum. And no, thanks for the use of your place here. This is a great venue for doing this. We're all socially distanced and pretty safe here. Experience matters. We're in a crisis. The virus has caused a crisis for the economy, for our families, for our family budgets, for the community's budget, for the state's budget. And experience matters when you're in a crisis. The last 10 years that I've been in the legislature, I've been able to build relationships across the aisle. I've developed, in working as a capital budget chair, I work in a very bipartisan way with my ranking member and their staff, and we build a very comprehensive statewide budget. As I said, I'm on the healthcare committee. That's a huge issue for us here on the peninsula, is to maintain rural healthcare. It is challenged across the country, and part of the challenge is our payer mix with Medicare, high Medicare and Medicaid. So being on the healthcare committee and then being on the appropriations committee to be able to approve appropriations that help us, like we did to increase the reimbursement rates for Olympic Medical Center and Grays Harbor Hospital, that's important. Those relationships, that network, that experience is, I think, delivered well for us here on the peninsula. Working with you and with your vote, we can continue to do good things to make the Olympic Peninsula a great place to live, a great place to work, and make it thrive as we get through these crises. So I'd appreciate your vote in November and enjoy the opportunity to continue to work with you to make it a better place to live here on the peninsula. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. Kai, I turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the candidates here today. I'd like to thank all our numerous volunteers who have made this meeting possible, as well as the 6 previous electoral forums. And I'd like to thank you, our membership and our audience, for being with us here this morning. Have a great day. This meeting is adjourned.